The National Assembly has activated legislative action on the proposed budget of 49.7 trillion naira presented by President Bola Tinubu to a joint session on Wednesday. This comes as the federal government targets a revenue of 34.8 trillion naira to finance the 2025 budget that remains high on a deficit of 13 trillion naira and debt servicing of 15.8 trillion naira. Arise correspondent Omo Bazwaye tells us more.
President Bola Tinubu lays the 2025 budget before a joint session of the National Assembly. It's a hefty sum of 49.7 trillion naira, more than 15 trillion naira higher than that of 2024, and Nigeria's largest budget ever in naira terms. The president tags it the budget of restoration, securing peace and building prosperity. According to Tinubu, his reforms are, quote, beginning to yield fruits and that there will be no reversals. He says the philosophy behind the 2025 budget is to be bold and ambitious. Tinubu is delighted to inform lawmakers that Nigeria's economy is gradually turning the corners with a growth rate of 3.4%, and even more heartwarming for Tinubu is the country's foreign reserve climbing to $42 billion from the negatives he met.
The road of reform is now clearly upon us. And as the president of this blessed nation, I know this less traveled road has not been easy. That there have been difficulties and sacrifices. They will not be in vain, I assure you.
Tinubu appeals to Nigerians to keep faith with him, stressing that the days of lamentations are over and it's time for citizens to rally around him to rewrite the country's story.
The 2025 budget seeks to restore macroeconomic stability, enhance the business environment, foster inclusive growth, employment, and poverty reduction, promote equitable income distribution, and human capital development.
But to achieve this, Tinubu plans to spend big on defense and security, about 4.9 trillion naira, infrastructure, especially energy, transport, and public works, that takes about 4.06 trillion naira. It's an investment Tinubu hopes will create jobs and lower the inflation figure drastically from 34% to 15%. The other projections include a daily crude oil production of 2.06 million barrels at $75 per barrel and an exchange rate of 1,500 naira to $1 and a growth rate of 4.6%.
The numbers for our 2025 budget proposal tell a bold and exciting story of the direction we are taking to retool and revamp the socio-economic fabric of our society.
But what we can assure Nigerians is that this budget will be realizable, this budget will be implemented. Let me speak, on some of the assumptions. This budget is predicated on an oil production of 2.06 barrels per day. We're already doing close to 2 million barrels, and I can assure you that by the year 2025, we'll surpass what is projected here, inclusive of condensate.
The 2025 budget, however, remains high on a deficit of 13 trillion naira, out of which Nigeria hopes to borrow 9.22 trillion naira to finance the budget. There is also the burden of a debt service of 15.8 trillion as Tinubu looks to generate a whopping 34.8 trillion naira as revenue to fund the budget. Earlier, President of the Senate, Godswill Akpabio, lauded Tinubu's leadership, especially how he has reduced debt service from 97% to 68%. The Speaker of the House of Representatives on his part says Nigeria's revenue, even by African standard, is still relatively small and that it will require a robust tax reform like the one pending before the National Assembly to increase the tally.
Nigeria tax bill represents a monumental shift in our fiscal landscape. It is disheartening that those who have not yet taken time to understand the initiative, the focus, are the ones shouting the loudest as critics. But we will make sure that we listen to Nigerians and dot the I's and cross the T's to the satisfaction of all Nigerians and for the benefit of this country. We will not kill any reform that you bring forward that will change the future of this country.
Indeed, Nigeria's low tax revenue also remain a major constraint. Our tax to GDP ratio, currently at approximately 10.9% for 2024, is among the lowest in Africa.
The National Assembly later extended the validity of the 2024 budget till June next year to accommodate further spending from the budget. Omo Bazwai, Rise News.
All right, thank you very much, Omo, for that take. I know Omo and Adesoa were live on ground reporting for Rise News, and so we also streamed the budget presentation live. A number of things happened beyond the speech and, of course, the actual budget presentation. But Rufai, your take on this, mixed reactions. What's your take on this story?
So for me, a couple of things happened. The song singing, which is unnecessary at a time when Nigeria is in dire straits. The lawmakers, trying as much as possible to say, we hail Baba Tinubu, and it showed in their body reaction. I mean, that was not necessary. I think budget presentation is a serious matter. Yeah, I know it's a time for political back-hitting and chummy moment, but all of that is not necessary. I must have to say, let's take these matters very seriously, because for the Nigerians that are suffering at home, they're hoping that the budget will do some help for them. They will not like that sight. Really, I should say that. And the president saying that the lawmakers, because he made a mistake, he said he thought it was the 11th assembly, and he said it was the 10th assembly. I said you'll be re-elected. Really? Okay. I don't want to talk too much on that, but hope they know that they will have to work hard to get re-elections. Nobody will have to tell them that. But let's go straight to brass tacks. The budget. I am very, very ambivalent about many things and many parameters. The president says he's going to cut inflation to about 15% from 34%. By now, based on the projections they gave, inflation should be about 20-something%. But they've not met inflation targets for this year. So if they've not met it for this year, how are they going to cut it? He says the budget is a budget of restoration. A budget of restoration where we are taking a deficit of 13 trillion. And when you look at the figures of 47.9 trillion, this is without going to the national. Once it goes to the National Assembly, it's going to be padded. And Mr. Akpabio did say, which was very scary for me, that we had 50% budget performance on capital projects and 48% on recurrent expenditure. Are you kidding me? The president did say that we had over 75% budget, over 75% expenditure. So I'm looking at two conflicting reports there. And that's why Akpabio, the Senate president, did say we're going to extend this current budget cycle into the next year cycle. So if he extends this 2024 budget into June, which is half year 2025, because we have not done well as regards budget, rate now, the budget execution rate. Performance rate. Then it speaks volumes about what is going on here. So all the expenditure they said they really got, did they really get that money? Will it also bring forward the problem of two budgets running concurrently, like we had with the last supplementary budget, into this year? Then, incurring this deficit at a time where we do not have a lot, is that a sensible move? I know they've touted the fact that, yes, we have very good reserve now, it can last us 9 months as against our 3-month threshold. But it's all well? President Tinubu, where is he going to get the 34 trillion from? Even if we pass our tax bill, are we sure of that? In the third quarter, were we able to meet all our revenue targets? There are numerous questions left on ground. Hopefully, crude oil price will be better. We've got 2.06 million barrels per day and all of that. Hopefully, all those parameters hold. But I don't really see a lot of details as regards how we're going to fight inflation, which is caused by mostly food prices. He didn't really say much on the agricultural sector. What are we going to do as regards that? Are we going to now look at that border, opening the border and allow food come in? This same President Tinubu that said there were going to be import waivers on food importation, we didn't hear anything about that policy. it's not a good time.
All right.
Okay, a number of issues. The president presented what he called the budget of restoration, securing peace, rebuilding prosperity. Securing peace. Are we at peace in Nigeria? Rebuilding prosperity. Are we prosperous in Nigeria? In a context where inflation is already over 34%, and we're in the season of Christmas, the people even are not so sure that they will enjoy Christmas. However, he said that the objectives are to stabilize the economy, improve livelihood, and reposition the country for greater performance. That's political talk. That's what any leader will say, because all of this is within the context of renewed hope. Now, when he says restoration, what does he want to restore? The president in his speech was talking about the economy growing up to about 3.46% in Q3 2024. Now, is that something to jubilate about? He says foreign reserves is at 42 billion US dollars. Exports are rising. Nigeria is having a trade surplus, he says, and those are signs of gradual recovery. Many other claims were made by the president. He talked about student loans, 34 billion in terms of student loans to over 300,000 students. The questions can be raised about each of these parameters. Inflation. Who tells them that inflation will jump from 34% and above to 15%? Who tells them that GDP that was doing elevator dancing in 2024 will rise to 4.6? Now, crude oil production is projected at 2.06 million barrels daily. Now, the Senate president said, oh, we did 1.8. Even that is disputed. Crude oil price in this year has been going up and down. And with the uncertainties in the Middle East, it's even going to be worse in 2025. So on what basis is any economist in the corridors of power speaking so confidently that it will be $75 per barrel? Exchange rate, they've pegged it at 1,500, whereas at this December, it's about 1,700. And economists, those who know the subject, are saying it's going to rise up to 2,000, 2,500 in the coming year. So there are grounds for doubts about even the parameters that have been presented. The president says the plan is to consolidate what has been achieved in the last year. The question to ask is that, look, there seems to be a disjunction between macroeconomics and macroeconomics, and also a disjunction between economic policy, monetary policy and fiscal policy. And this Nigerian government has not been able to address that. The Nigerian people measure the impact of all of this in terms of how it affects them. And Nigerians are saying we're in dire straits. All these macroeconomic figures, they can only interpret them in terms of the reality that they live. And that reality is problematic in Nigeria today. Now, if you look at the budget allocation, defense and security is getting 4.9 trillion. Defense and security is always getting the lion's share. But I recall that a certain senator once stood in the Senate, stood up in the Senate and said, look, why is defense and security getting all the money? We have to audit the money to find out whether indeed they are, putting this money in defense and security. Well, the president also defended the tax reform bills, saying that many people are not yet to read the proposed bills. Or maybe it's Akpabio saying that. Well, the Senate president and the Speaker of the House of Representatives, they were too, what's the English word now? They were too eager to receive the bill and to say, everything is okay. Even the Senate president was doing the job of the president for him, saying even things that the president forgot to put in his speech. And now he's justifying the calendar that the 2024 budget will be in operation till, June 2025, where the Constitution makes a provision for that. But why is it that they could not meet the deadline? Because I had asked earlier on this same program, that why is it that we don't have the budget? Why are we having it at the last minute? Now, is that extension that Senator Akpabio referred to as a result of the fact that they mismanaged the time? So these are the issues. But the lowest common denominator is how the people are affected. We're told budget performance this year is 50% with capital expenditure, 48% with recurrent expenditure. And Senate President Akpabio was praising that as a sign of good performance. How will 50% marginal pass or 48% marginal pass constitute great performance? These are the questions. But the issue is about our own welfare as the people of Nigeria, not all these macroeconomic figures that they put.
All right, budget of restoration. And so hopefully what this budget aims to do is to secure peace and, of course, also promote the prosperity of for Nigerians. In fact, in his presentation, in the speech before he, before the joint assembly, the 10th joint assembly of the 10th National Assembly, he had talked about the fact that it was important that they were able to consolidate on the good work they've done in the last 18 months, or the beginning of the work they've done in the last 18 months, and this budget reflected that. Just a few things. Of course, earlier on, after the FEC meeting, we had some time to dissect some of the parameters used for the budget, and we had already spoken about how some of those things seemed quite unrealistic. Of course, what a number of people have been talking about is the projection for inflation coming down from 34.6% to 15%. Now, unfortunately, no fundamentals suggest that this will be achievable. So at best, it seems like a very optimistic outlook. But unfortunately, you cannot fund a budget on optimism, or you cannot project, in terms of a budget on optimism and hope. It has to be realistic. It has to be achievable. For this to happen, if inflation is going to come down, one of the things we talked about is that the biggest driver of inflation is food inflation, rising food costs, and food production must increase incredibly to drive down inflation. The budget talks about agriculture. However, the amount of money allocated to agriculture has been flagged as largely insufficient and hasn't moved away from very largely from previous budgets, meaning that not a lot of difference or change is going to happen. 800 billion naira for agriculture is said to be too small if you're looking at improving the agricultural sector and you're looking to bring down inflation by more than half to 15%, then that's not anywhere. This budget does not reflect that we're serious about that. If this must happen in terms of agriculture, food production, like I mentioned, must increase. He talked about bumper harvests driven by enhanced security, reducing reliance on food imports. He hammered on the importance of security to ensure that we're able to have more food on our tables, farmers are able to produce more, and people are able to feed, Nigerians are able to feed themselves. In the last 18 months, we haven't seen a lot of work has been done in the area of security for securing our agricultural farmlands areas, middle belt areas, and agricultural producing states. But unfortunately, we haven't seen that translate to the cost of produce because there are a lot of other challenges facing that sector. One of the things we talked about is an investment in moving subsistence farming to mechanized farming and investing in innovation and development. How much would 800 billion naira go towards that? How far would it reach to meeting that need? So it's saying one thing, but not saying the amount of money to really push that forward. Security and defense has taken the large chunk, as always. But what we must see again is not just budgetary allocation to these areas, but to see its performance and to see at least a 75-80% performance in these areas. There are big concerns about revenue generation. He spec the amount of $75 per barrel on the international oil scene, but a number of factors will also come into play. If President Donald Trump's threat or his conversation around increasing oil production to drive down oil prices, it's not going to augur well for us. And it's going to mean that the $75 per barrel is also optimistic and not realistic. But again, that's predicated on policies by the American president, unfortunately, and of course other factors around the world. But at 1,500 naira, from 1,700 naira, people have said analysts have said it's realistic. But for Nigerians, I don't know how hopeful that is, especially if you look at where we're coming from. We were promised that the naira would get the fair value of the naira, and it would be about, less than 1,000 naira. But we're still looking at a 1,500 naira in 2025. That's not optimistic at all, because if you look at that, the cost and even how it drives inflation and how it erodes some of the profits that we have by weakening our naira, it's not very optimistic in that instance. Infrastructure, he talked a lot about infrastructure, and 4.06 trillion naira has been allocated to that. Spoke about some legacy projects, including the Lagos-Calabar Highway, spoke about I think the Sokoto, the bridge in the northern parts of Nigeria and those areas. So beyond that, what we will call for is beyond building new infrastructure is the maintenance of the older ones, because if we don't maintain the older ones, the same fate will befall the others. A lot of things to really dissect. So I'm glad that we had the DG of the Budget Office joining us very shortly on the show this morning, so we can actually take out take the line items and break it down and see just how prosperous or how restorative this budget is.